Hi, I'm Stephen Carson coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri in these United States. Welcome back to the show. Something different every week. This week it's my roads. Yes. Fortunately, I have the kind of quality autistic audience that is happy to hear us talk about highways for a while. Okay, so just want to mention in terms of supporting the show, which I super appreciate, Subscribestar, and I don't mention enough, Bitcoin. I have a public Bitcoin wallet in the video description, and people who I don't even know who they are occasionally pop something in there. So I appreciate it if you do that, and that helps cover the costs of making this more and more professional. By the way, I think this is my first week. Yeah, this is my first week where I have both my lights, I believe. So anyway, all my lighting should be nice, and there shouldn't be funny things on my face and stuff like has been happening before. We'll see, but it looks good. Okay, so let me bring on my guest. A pleasure to have Clossington with us. Hello, sir.
How are you doing, Radlib?
Very good. We got to meet in person at an event in February, which was really great. So I've gotten to not just meet Clossington, but Clossington's gotten to meet Mrs. Radlib. Oh, forgot to slip that shill in. Mrs. Radlib and I will be doing the courtship stream on Saturday, 2 days from now. It's already scheduled, so you can tap that, notify me when it goes live thing. That's that. Okay, so Clossington, we are going to talk about the post-war. We're focusing on the roads, but actually, I don't know how much you wanted to cover. You are focusing on the highway construction, right? But there actually was more than highway construction that happened, I think.
So I want to give a brief overview of a brief background on the history of of federal infrastructure projects throughout the late 19th century, all the way up until today, with a special emphasis on the big decade. So that is 1956 to 1966, where about 41,000 miles of highway were actually designed and built.
Right. Okay, so as we get into that, let's mention that you do have some professional connection to the story we're telling today. You're a ringer, as I like to put it on my channel. So could you explain that a little bit?
So usually I do political commentary, although professionally I am a civil engineer. I specifically do contracting work with regards to bridges, roads, infrastructure. Like I've been in the industry, ever since I graduated college, I've had a steady job doing road, rail, and bridge design. So I'm also professionally affiliated with some of the institutions that we will be going over today.
Right, which you were saying bear some responsibility for, in fact, what we're going to be what was made and how it was made and so forth, right?
Yes. The thing is, roads tend to be a bipartisan notch on anyone's belt, saying I improved the roads. Republicans or Democrats can get behind it. I'll probably go over this actually pretty soon, but you have in the late 19th century, you had both labor unions and the evil, mustache twirling capitalists advocating for the creation of national roads.
Right.
Everybody wanted good, reliable infrastructure. The farmers wanted it, the urbanites wanted it. Everyone wanted good paved roads. And it's it's my professional responsibility to ensure that government is as responsible as possible, to ensure that there is no investment, to ensure that roads are as safe and economically feasible, economically responsible as possible.
Right. Okay, so we're going to talk about the history, the build out, and even eventually get to some analysis or some evaluation of the social effects and cultural effects and so forth. So in short, you're not only going to present this stuff to us, but if we're upset about it, we can actually kind of hold you responsible, right?
Well, the thing is, after digging into the history, the history of the federal highway system, it comes off as a lot of the bad things that are associated with the highways are actually these rather autistic engineers who have a mission, and they like straight lines. They like straight lines, and they like building things as cheap and effectively as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that means demolishing uh, like ethnic ghettos or blowing dynamite like into a mountain, they'll do whatever they need to do to have a straight line.
Okay. Well, that's getting ahead of ourselves. Shall I bring up the first slide, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. I'm glad you're starting in the 19th century, because in a way that's where we've left off on this channel. I meant to say that, sorry, that in the Rise of Empire series, which began with the sort of economic motivations for the war between the states and ended with the 1898 overseas empire really kicking off with the Spanish-American War and all that, we had reason to mention quite a bit a lot of what they used to call in those days internal improvements, which nowadays I think, tell me if you know the history better than me, Clossington, but internal improvements, if you read in the early like 1800s political debates and stuff, is what we mean when we say infrastructure now. I think we're literally talking about the same thing, and the terminology just sort of shifted in 200 years, right?
I mean,
kind of.
We don't use the same language anymore,
Yeah.
but it sounds about right. And I know you guys have covered the history of the railroads, but essentially the interstate highway system of the 20th century replaces the railway system of the 19th century.
Right.
And there are a lot of, the highways effectively gutted the railways in a way, but
yeah,
I'm getting ahead of myself.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, we talked a bit about how there was a lot of waste, shall we say, in the building of railroads, a lot of corruption, with speculation around, where would the railroad go, and buying up land that the railroad would go through, and suddenly the land's more valuable because now the railroad goes past it. Anyway, there was a lot of shady stuff going on in the 19th century around railroad construction. But anyway, so from kind of taking off from where we left off the story, go ahead.
So from the 1880s until 1920s, you had what was called the Good Roads movement. This movement was more of a grassroots activist, like big tent campaign. Like as I listed in my little slide, farmers, they wanted to be able to ship out their crops as cheaply and quickly as possible, because they're incredibly in tune with the international food stuffs market. But the thing is, outside of the major urban centers in the U.S., you're dealing with gravel or dirt roads. Like most of rural America did not have paved roads. As I'll get into later, we didn't have like paved concrete roads until I think it was like 1906 or something like that. But
okay, and to be clear, this is not exactly new technology. I mean, because there's Roman roads I've seen that the Roman Empire built that were better than what you're describing we had in the 19th century.
Yes, but the thing is, we needed a federal highway system because you're not dealing with Roman soldiers. You're dealing with 80-ton trucks, and 80-ton trucks would have demolished a Roman road.
Right.
So in from the 1880s until the 1920s, you had what was called it's a sort of vestigial part of the progressive era, the progressive movement or whatever. You had like the early adopters of automobiles advocating for urban improvements to roads, and you also had farmers. They wanted to get around the railroads. The farmers wanted to get around the railroads, and it's a lot cheaper for farmers to I guess ship their drive 100 miles to some major river on the Mississippi water basin, and then ship your crops down to New Orleans. It's much cheaper than going through the railroads. The railroads were incredibly vital to U.S. industry, like shipping actually high quality industrial products like steel or any sort of manufactured good. And agriculture is it's not competitive to these industries. It's not competitive with actually heavy industry in terms of tonnage on railways. So that's why you had the U.S. Department of Agriculture being the first federal agency to subsidize state roads. You didn't have concrete roads, but you had, extra dirt roads.
So wait, I'm sorry. You're saying that shipping agricultural output, grain or whatever, on trains didn't tend to be economic, but it worked better if it was on trucks?
It will be. But that's it's getting ahead of myself.
Oh.
These farmers just wanted to be able to transport via wagon to the nearest river to ship out their grain.
Okay, and by the way, Clossington, before we get past the early automobile owners thing, just have to share a family story, which is that one of my ancestors or relatives way back there was one of the first 2 automobile owners in one of those small states. I keep saying Rhode Island, but I don't think it's Rhode Island. Anyway, it's one of those small northeastern states. And they had a car accident with the other car in the state. I'm not joking. Anyway, so a little family story. Okay, go ahead.
So you had the U.S. Department of Agriculture subsidizing a few hundred roads here or there within rural America. The American hinterlands. You didn't actually see the feds intervene in urban areas. That had its own infrastructure. They had their own shenanigans. This was the time of Tammany Hall and these big political machines who they did actually keep very well kept roads, but they charged a fortune for them. So then the good roads movement, you had a bunch of pamphleteering, you had public awareness campaigns, and this eventually culminated in Woodrow Wilson signing the Federal Aid Road Act of 1916. So this is the first of its kind. The federal government will pay 50% to 50% construction costs for the construction of interstate roads.
Okay, so this is not. I was going to say, well, that was just about 100 years ago that the federal government finally got involved in roads. But to be fair, automobiles are really new at this point, right? And trains were more essential for transport in the 19th century, right?
Yes, but I'll get into this later. By 1916, there were 3.5 million cars.
Oh, okay.
And 250,000 trucks. So at that point, you kind of need paved roads.
Yeah.
So 1916, Woodrow Wilson essentially spent $85 million, which is $2.1 billion in today's currency, on roads over a 5-year block. And then after that 5-year spending spree was over, you had, I think it was Harding, that passed who was president in 1921. You had the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1921 that officially created the interstate highway system in name. Like before, you had state roads that interconnected with other state roads, but then you had what was officially the interstate highway system. I mean, these were still gravel roads, but now you have the Fed officially guaranteeing certain amounts of money being paid to improvement.
So would they have like the numbers that we're familiar with starting in 1921, or Highway 95 and US 1 and all
that? That's a little bit later. Like that comes out of like the 40s.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, like many people don't realize this, but almost every road that you drive on today, every state and municipal road has like a number. Like usually they only go up to like 10,000, but they don't have very fancy numbers. So during this big spending spree, during Wilson's big spending spree, you had what was called the Lincoln Highway Convoy. So this was the Lincoln Highway was the first road. Like we had the Transcontinental Railway, but this was the first like actual road connecting Washington D.C. to San Francisco. It was 3,251 miles. It was constructed it was constructed as part of Wilson's scheme, and it was a complete disaster. Even though I can bring up Eisenhower's notes, but essentially, as soon as he got out of the major cities, like DC was fine. He had fairly decent gravel roads for what they were. He drove on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which would eventually become the model. Well, it's one of the early models and pivotal parts of the interstate highway system. But Pennsylvania, very good. Maryland, very good. As soon as you crossed as soon as you got to the Appalachian Mountains, dirt road. I think they ended up hitting like 20 different bridges. Like the bridges were so low that they accidentally hit them. Like many bridges,
I see.
The
top of the bridge.
The clearance was too low.
Right.
They drove what was it? It's like 81 different motorized vehicles of every different size, just to test out what the roads could handle. And they didn't handle it well. There was no standard understanding of like how wide a road should be, how steep roads should be. I'll later get on to what the highway system mandated in terms of actual road standards, but some roads were too thin. I'm sure like these are 3 pictures of like one truck fell over, another truck fell into a ditch, another truck got stuck in the mud. There are pictures of
right.
Essentially like these wooden planks acting as a bridge over a ditch. Like the Lincoln Highway, even though it was like it was the Transcontinental Railroad, it was a dirt road.
Or the Transcontinental regular road.
Yeah, Transcontinental regular road.
Yeah, that was the way to go by car from one side to the other or whatever, right?
Yeah. And it took them 62 days traveling at 5 miles an hour to get all the way from DC to San Francisco.
5 miles an hour. Oh, an average of 5 miles an hour.
Yeah, average of 5 miles an hour.
Right.
But they kept on, like their trucks kept on having these issues with the roads. Like Eisenhower said that there were almost no mechanical problems with the trucks. All the problems were with the actual roads themselves. I'll see if I can click on this link.
Oh, and for comparison, for some of our foreign friends, even today, it's not trivial to go from one side of America to the other. I just Googled it. How long does it take to drive across the USA? They said it'll take between 4 and 6 days, assuming you're willing to spend about 8 hours behind the wheel per day. So it's a several day trip, any way you slice it. But 62 days is pretty long.
I found it. Yeah, very best roads: Maryland, Pennsylvania, California. Yeah, he hated Utah. Like Utah was in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And like one of the great things about the like out west, Phoenix did not exist. It's a small like boom town maybe, but there were no ways of actually reaching these towns unless you were extracting something. Where is it?
Now I have to say, I didn't realize that there'd be an Eisenhower story arc. I mean, I know we're going to get to his role in the post-war World War II, but I had this sort of urban legend in my head that he fought in Germany during World War II, great roads there, and was like, yeah, we need some of these. I mean, maybe that's true, but clearly roads were already on his mind from doing this in 1919.
Yeah, he was a young lieutenant during this convoy. Like I think I have like young baby face picture of Eisenhower in this. Oh yeah, there he is. Yeah, he's very, very young in this.
Yeah.
But Western Utah on the Salt Lake Desert becomes almost impassable for heavy vehicles. Like ruts, pits, dust, holes. Just awful. 90 miles away from the nearest railroad. You're in the middle of nowhere, and you're on a dirt road, and this is supposed to be the U.S. infrastructure project.
Right. And so worth noting, we're in 2022, so I guess this didn't get celebrated like the what's the famous oh, my mind's gone blank, the guys who went up the river and explored the West,
like
Lewis and Clark. Yeah. I guess it's not going to get celebrated like the Lewis and Clark expedition, but were we to celebrate it, the 100th year anniversary of Eisenhower trying to go across the road with the convoy would have been 100 years ago. Yeah, it was about 100 years ago, 3 years ago. So,
I made a typo. In 1916, there were 1.3 million cars. Today, there are 255 million motorized vehicles in the U.S.
Right.
Like they didn't not have cars. Like they had a lot of cars, but they were Model Ts.
Yeah. That, by the way, that's a pretty impressive number because I haven't checked in a while, but I mean, that means we have what, one car for every 2 people, or more than that. It's even more than that would suggest.
Yeah, I think
we have a lot of more motorized vehicles given our population, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, we have a lot of cars.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. To 2021 estimate, we have 331 people in the United States, and you just said 255 million motorized.
235 million.
235. Yeah. So, if it was half of our population, that is, one car for every 2 people, we'd have 165 million. But we have 235 million. So, wow, we got a lot of motors.
Yeah. Also as part of so this is getting post Wilson, but during Wilson's administration, he created the Bureau of Public Roads to act as this is before the Federal Highway Administration. The Bureau of Public Roads was originally created. It was created from the federal agency that built roads for the national forests, for the national parks and forests, and it also connected. They also were responsible for the federal roads and federal land out west. Out west, no one actually lived there, and to this day, there are massive tracts of land just owned by the federal government.
We've mentioned that, yeah. And there's states where the population is incredibly low, like the Dakotas and places like that.
Yeah. So the Bureau of Public Roads, it's like the proto Federal Highway Administration, but they were responsible for roads in national parks, forests, assisted states with road construction, per Wilson's spending spree, helped beautify highways. So that's just code for make work schemes. Conducted various transportation studies, collision, safety and collision research, subsurface examinations, erosion testing, and maintenance cost studies. So, once again, I mentioned that it's like a subset of the Department of Agriculture. And I'd say it also is very much part of like the Department of the Interior, but it's strictly there to manage federal land out west for the most part, and then help farmers here or there maintain their roads where poor counties can't. And then FDR stepped in. So after the big Wilson spending spree of the late 1910s to early 1920s, you have a lull in federal spending on the interstates until FDR and the Great Depression. The Bureau of Public Roads was politicized and changed and turned into this giant make work scheme. They had supervised or administered at least 7,000 miles of work relief highway projects and 17,000 miles of loan and grant highway projects. This is the highway system one. It's not even 1.0. It's like it's the beta test for the highway system. It's not quite the highway system, but they're dreaming of the highway system.
And do you happen to know what the quality was of what they did during those FDR years?
It's pretty high for that time.
Okay.
From the pictures I've seen, they look a whole lot better than state roads.
Mm-hmm.
They look better than state and local roads.
Yeah, I haven't paid as much of attention to. Well, it's just hard to tell. Like, you don't know which roads were built when and stuff necessarily. But I've seen plenty of things that were built during those years by the alphabet make work agencies of FDR, and as an economist, I can and do criticize that sort of central planning silliness and stuff. But that doesn't mean that they didn't build things that lasted. In some cases, I visit things at certain parks and the stuff's still there from, nearly 90 years ago now. And it's solid. In some cases, it's really great. It's well built.
Yeah. But I still have the feeling that there was a lot of cynicism involved. These were make work schemes. So it might not have been top tier stuff. But I added this slide because the Bureau of Public Roads, you had General Lucius D. Clay. He was one of Eisenhower's generals, but he also ran the Bureau of Public Roads. He and his committee created this outline for this dream of about 38,000 miles of highways interconnecting America in 1947. So they're dreaming of it, but they don't quite have the willpower to do it quite yet. Like before I actually get into like what happened, like the heel shift from Bureau of Public Roads, make work scheme, we're dreaming, into the actual highway system. I just want to give like a brief overview of where this all comes from, the actual theory behind like the modern roads that we know today.
Cool.
So we all know Newtonian physics. Force equals mass times acceleration and pressure, yada, yada, yada. And we knew physics. We knew how to build good road. We've known how to build good roads since the Roman times. But now you can actually, but starting in like the 1820s, we actually had the study of material science. So you have the discovery of shear and effective stress, elasticity. We had the invention of Portland cement. So everything is flexible. So concrete, it expands and contracts. It's like a sponge. It expands and contracts very slightly, but it's flexible and it expands and contracts with heat. And we invented Portland cement. Portland cement is the cement that everybody uses to this day. It's like the gold standard recipe for cement. Like people would say, the Romans had excellent cement that survives to this day. Well, they use some very rare volcanic ash, and a lot of these roads were buried underneath clay for hundreds of thousands of years.
Oh, I see. Right. They weren't exposed to the elements the whole 2,000 years since they built them, right?
Yeah, and like they had the aqueducts, and they have like the Colosseum. Like the Colosseum was made from this very fine clay. So concrete. What is concrete? Concrete is gravel plus sand plus water plus an adhesive. So a sort of lime to actually get it sticky, have it stick together. Like cement it's that adhesive. So what you do is it's basically clay, except it's superheated to thousands of degrees Fahrenheit, until there are these very, very fine particles that will stick to just about anything. And like one of the reasons why like planner types today really hate concrete and construction is because it takes such amounts of energy to actually superheat cement that it's something absurd, like 10-15% of all energy consumption goes into baking cement, into the actual manufacture of cement.
I didn't know that.
Wow. So cement is invented. You have the first uses of reinforced concrete in the 1890s. So you have so concrete, right? It's very brittle. It's a rock. But the thing is, it doesn't do like it's brittle, but if you push it in the wrong direction, push it sideways, it'll crack. So what you need is steel as a sort of stabilizer, and to absorb certain lateral stresses or certain shear stresses. So what you had in the 1890s were the first skyscrapers. Like you had steel skyscrapers, but now you had reinforced steel. Not reinforced steel. You had reinforced concrete, which is much cheaper than steel. So you had more skyscrapers all the time. 1909, you had the first concrete slab road. So there are two types of road, or two types of materials that you can use for roads. There is a concrete slab, so think like just a block, like a rectangular block of concrete, reinforced with some steel. You also have asphalt, which is it's essentially like it's like gravel plus petroleum putty, like hot petroleum putty. It's very
Right.
cheap. It's very cheap, and you don't want to use that for your highways. You use that for quick jobs. And then you had the Austrian School of Soil Mechanics. So 1925, this guy named Terzaghi, he was a World War I vet who fought in World War I on the side of he fought for Austria. He was some sort of artillery officer. He invents the field of geotechnical engineering. So you see, like over here, we have the invention of modern day foundations. So we can now confidently build. We can confidently now build like bridges and roads on different types of soil. Like before, you had the Leaning Tower of Pisa. We didn't know what kind of soil we were dealing with. If only they had like Terzaghi do whatever soil experiments he needed to do to figure out that like the foundation will settle in a very bad way, and you're going to have a leaning tower. So he discovered 1925 you have modern day concrete foundations, and then around 1920 you had the study of fracture mechanics. So now we understand. So with all of this knowledge, 1920s we have figured out how to build giant dams like the Hoover Dam. We've figured out how to build giant skyscrapers made out of reinforced concrete. We now have modern bridges. We have tens of millions of cars, and we have modern day roads for all intents and purposes. We don't have the standards quite figured out yet, so there will be a lot of car crashes, like an absurd. Well, we didn't understand traffic, and we didn't understand like how wide lanes should be, how much of a shoulder you need. So there's a lot of experimentation, but out of the experimentation, you have mega projects that go well, and then bridges that will eventually collapse later. So you have you have the federal government, sponsoring some. Well, the federal government is not. You have the Hoover. Yeah, you do have the Hoover Dam as a mega project, but a lot of the experimentation are these industrialist types. Like if you look at the great Art Deco skyscrapers, they're these just insane industrialists that like to build big things with the latest materials.
Right. Sorry. Hoover Dam says constructed between 1931 and 1936.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that's a little early deployment of some of these techniques.
So 1920s, we discover exactly how concrete fractures and how it degrades over time, so we can design around it. You need certain thickness of concrete, you need certain dimensions for foundation, so you can have these mega projects later. Using this, out of all of these new developments, you have the wide-eyed dreamers. So this is the 1939 New York World's Fair. This exhibit is called Futurama, sponsored by General Motors. So their big dream is these gigantic mega highways that run through your cities, and your buildings are just going to be 100 stories high, and everybody will be able to drive by and marvel at these giant like it's like the movie Metropolis almost. It's
right.
But
now this isn't I mean, I'm looking at these models here, and this isn't that far off of, I don't know, I'm picturing certain parts of Chicago, downtown Chicago and stuff, right?
Well, the next slide is the actual implementation.
Okay.
So this is Houston, Texas, 1970, the urban nightmare. So this is getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but you go from like nice, like smooth, you have these nice smooth buildings. You know, what you don't see in these models are parking lots.
Yeah, right.
So 1970 Houston, Texas, you have some giant buildings, but they're blocky, and you have acres upon acres of parking lots.
Right.
I don't think the modern day parking garage was invented until like the 1960s. So
so all parking was on ground level for decades.
Yeah. So this is not good. This is the like this Futurama exhibit. It was, dreamt up by the General Ford, General Motors, the General Motors like crew. However, it was fully endorsed by like the Teamster unions. Like more jobs for us. They if they saw, some low rise slum, demolish it. Let's make way for bulldoze it and make way for the highways running through the cities, because we have these gigantic megaliths to create.
Yeah.
Their creation will be very ugly. Also, something that you don't really think about. Some of these exits and interchanges are going to be massive. So on your right, like that is the city of Siena, Italy, and right next to it is to scale the interstate change outside of Houston, Texas.
And he says population 30,000 of Siena, Italy, population 0 of the interchange. At least in terms of permanent residents. Lots of people pass through it. But
yeah. So out of the big dreamers of Futurama, we have the know-how. We know how to design these reinforced concrete megastructures. We know how to build very big bridges, and we know how to design decent highways. And we've had a few different
put them on top of soil and not have them sink into the ground.
Yes, modern foundations theory.
Yeah.
So you have the big one, post World War II, 1956. So we've had a few different. So the federal government has tried to jumpstart the federal highway system, but it takes President Eisenhower to actually pull it all together and to actually spearhead it. So as far back as like 1947, we had the plan for connecting all of America's cities with these nice modern highways, but it took Eisenhower to actually put this thing together. So Eisenhower. He saw how bad America's roads were in 1919. He goes off and fights in World War II. He's the supreme commander of the Allied forces, and while he is invading Europe, he the U.S. military, they built essentially two roads on their campaigns. 2 roads going straight to Germany, or 2-laned roads going straight to Germany. 2 lanes because it takes about 2 lanes to fit a tank through there. And if you have smaller cars, you can have one going one way, one coming another way. But he gets to Germany and he sees the Autobahn. Now the Autobahn is the envy of the world. Or in terms of infrastructure, the Germans were at the cutting edge of geometric design. They did highway design better than anyone else. They did construction design much better than anyone else. Like Terzaghi was Austrian, of course. And what Eisenhower did was his administration put together an 8-page guideline of, okay, so this is how we want to design our highways. And he used the old Bureau of Public Roads plans to put together this massive scheme. $100 billion over 10 years. Let's build 40,000 miles of the latest and greatest, latest greatest in design highways.
Let's not miss that inflation-adjusted figure. Over $1 trillion in today's dollars. So even by federal government spending standards, that's a lot of money.
Yes. What was it? Earlier we had the equivalent of $1.2 billion spent by Wilson over 5 years. But now we have $1 trillion over 10 years.
Totally different scale.
So this is a little bit misleading because it'll be more than this. After 1960, they've created all of the highways in the easy areas, the nice flat Midwestern and Western parts. They'll go grossly over budget when constructing highways through the Rocky Mountains. They'll find they'll sink in Florida swamps. They'll have to dynamite mountains. They'll have to they'll have to innovate, and they did. A lot of our modern day pile and foundations in boring technologies come out of this time period. You had a lot of workaholics working on this thing.
Real quick rabbit hole, Clossington. I was distracted by this legend of Eisenhower being inspired by the Autobahn. It's not just a legend. You would say it's true.
No, it's true.
It's true. I mean, he was negatively inspired by his experience in 1919.
Yes.
But then he actually sees what they've done with the Autobahn, and he's impressed, and he's like, "Man, we ought to do this back home."
Yes.
So I looked it up, and I was just wondering. I associate the original build out. They still call it the Autobahn to this day, I think, but I associate the original build out with the mid-century Germans, as we call them. And just looking it up real quick, that looks like that is correct. Mostly, they were thinking about it they conceived the idea in the days of the Weimar Republic in the 1920s, but it never really happened, basically, until Hitler took power in 1933. He loved this idea, kicked it off, and by 1936, they were going gangbusters building roads. So so by the time Eisenhower gets there, they've done some serious road building during the 1930s. Yeah. Anyway,
a lot of these were sort of make work schemes of his own.
Yeah, right. But depression was going on in Europe too. So yeah.
But you had autistic German engineering at the head of this, and very conscientious workers, and you had some of the best car companies on earth.
So German make work versus American make work, head-to-head comparison, right?
Yeah. I think Yeah. So Eisenhower, he justifies all of this spending, $1 trillion, with four different policy points. He wants to improve highway safety. So we didn't know what we know today about bridge barriers, lane widths. We didn't know what we knew about a sight distance. If there's a hill in front of you, how far can you see ahead of you?
Right.
Just stuff like that. So he cites 36,000 people are killed per year, and 1 million are killed, or 1 million injured on the highways per year. So, like nowadays, like I'm pretty sure.
Just to give that scale, you said 36,000, and I'm sorry, is that the current number or is that back then?
That was back then.
Back then, okay,
36,000 killed per year.
Yeah, just to give that some kind of way of understanding that, we would say about 58,000 soldiers died in the Vietnam War. So this is like a Vietnam War every year and a half on the highways in terms of loss of life, right?
Yeah, and also remember that like your tires are made out of like rubber, like actual rubber, and they didn't have the best traction back then. So it's the highways were not great.
Right.
Second justification, everybody likes good infrastructure. If you can get from point A to point B, saving yourself half the time, businesses save a whole lot of money. There's that. Third, in case of an atomic attack on our key cities, the road net must permit quick evacuation of target areas, mobilization of defense forces, and maintenance of every essential economic function. So, I mean, that one's pretty straightforward.
Right.
But like, I think this is actually a very real concern. But hey guys, I want to build a highway through your cities so that we can evacuate people. But you have some starry-eyed dreamers who are still dreaming of Futurama.
Right.
So it's a sort of coincidence of once. Yeah. Where is it? Oh yeah. Fourth, GDP. So America is quickly industrializing, and we are also manufacturing and selling more cars than ever. And trucks, we need good roads for trucks, and we need good roads that do not create traffic jams. I listened to a documentary that was made in the late 50s as part of like the Eisenhower PR campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And like about a quarter of the documentary, you have testimonials about people complaining about traffic jams. Like they were even worse than they are today.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it was pretty bad. So you have 40,000 miles of highways built in 10 years. It goes over budget.
Yeah, I was going to say. So, you're citing the post hoc numbers, or are you saying that they obviously went over budget, but in terms of the miles that they plan to build and the time they plan to do it in, they pretty much nailed it?
I mean,
roughly.
Roughly, like they did accomplish what they set out to do. Yeah, they went. I think it was like 10 billion over budget, but if you're doing something that has never been done before, this is not maintenance. This is like trailblazing. Through like the roughest of Western terrain, through deserts and mountains and swamps.
And so
so they do actually accomplish what they set out to do, and it's widely touted as the envy of the world.
Was it the envy of the world?
Well, it kind of was actually.
Oh, really? Okay. But
like,
I thought the Germans had the envy of the world in the Autobahn.
well, the Autobahn was, it was kind of a little bit demolished, just a little bit. It has like
yeah,
tank,
right.
and also it was kind of cut in half because Iron Curtain.
Right.
So out of the interstate highway, out of this spending spree, you have this organization really step up, and it's the American Society of Highway Transportation. No, it's ASHTO. It's a professional NGO that is responsible for developing highway standards. So they create this nice 8-page. Well, this is a PDF of it. But
I looked up the acronym Clossington, American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials.
Yes.
But it's a private organization, right?
Well, yes. So it's okay. So they're both, well, it's a private NGO, but it consists of members of top members of every Department of Transportation from every state, and it also is staffed with, or it also has members who are the top private contractors and engineers in America. So, right. These guys, they are professional engineers. This is more than a profession. This is their livelihoods. This is they're hobbyists, they're professors, they do the research, they all know what they are talking about.
Yeah.
And they create this 9-page highway design paper. They create this highway design sheet. So you must have a minimum of 50 miles per hour in urban areas for your highway, and a minimum of 70 miles per hour for urban settings. You have to have a 2% slope. So a road it's crested, so that water runs off.
Right. It's not perfectly flat. It's
not perfectly flat.
We don't even notice with our eye, as I recall, right?
No. Well, you can kind of see it.
Yeah, it's a little subtle if you're not looking for it.
So they create you have to have these minimum speeds. You have to have a minimum of 1.5% slope. Ideally 2%. Realistically, you have to have a 2% slope. All highways must have lanes that are 12 feet wide. The Autobahn had 12.3 feet wide. You have to have certain parameters, certain shoulder, outside of the lanes, you have to have certain shoulders, be certain widths. And also you have the creation of the federal load rating system. So essentially a bridge must be able to have a 40,000 pound truck be able to go over it. It has to be able, 40,000 pound truck, with 4 wheels, and it has to be able to withstand the force of I think it's an 80,000 pound truck with 6 wheels, something like that.
Right.
So they did set out what they.
By the way, did that end up setting up the limits of trucking kind of to this day? You can't go over a certain, because I remember there are always those weighing stations and stuff, right?
Yep, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Eisenhower did not want to have to drive trucks over floorboards, in the middle of the desert.
Right.
So there's that. So there's the creation of all of these standards. They ended up to this day we have about 49,000 miles of highway interconnecting every city in America. So that's what they create.
Wait. Say that again. 49,000 is where we're at.
Yep, that's where we're at.
And they built 40,000 miles in that 10-year campaign. So they basically built what we have today, more or less. I mean, there's been a little bit of building since then, but most of it literally happened in 10 years back in the 50s and 60s.
Yes.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Although, like, a lot of it was.
I'm just absorbing this. There really hasn't been that much expansion of the system. In what?
Actually, it's declined.
65. So what is that? 40, 60 years almost. It's hardly budged. It's not doubled or anything like that, right?
No, it's actually declined a little bit because, you know.
What do you mean?
I'll get to it later, but
okay.
A lot of the highways went through cities, and a lot of cities did not like this very much. So they were like, okay, so let's just demolish them. So the expansion is from 1956 to 1966.
Oh, and by the way, sorry, I just wanted to mention, I had looked it up. I just had it in front of me. Eisenhower was president from 53 to 61, I think. Well, January 53 to 61, something like that. So yeah, he actually is president while at least half of this is literally going on. He gets it passed, and then it's actually happening under him for a good chunk of those 10 years.
Yes.
Anyway, go ahead.
So 1967 rolls around. There's the Mothman incident. So the Silver Bridge overlooking Point Pleasant, West Virginia, collapses. 46 people are killed. Now, this was a bridge built during the Wilson boom. So 46 people die. Even though the bridge was inspected like 2 years earlier, and they did about $34,000 of repairs on it, they did not catch a manufacturer defect inside of one of these steel eye bars. So this really lit a fire underneath the behinds of the Federal Highway Administration. So they say to themselves, okay, so we've built all of these highways. We need to retrench a little bit and figure out our maintenance system. And we need to make sure that we don't have any more bridge collapses, because this could have been prevented. The problem was that there were no redundancies. Like, if you have like if one single bar, like if one bar snaps, like, does the entire structure collapse?
Yeah, but we call it single point of failure, right?
Yes.
So they just weren't engineering them with redundancy in the points of failure, right?
Yeah. So they retrenched, and the entirety of like the 60s and the entirety of like the 70s and 80s was a time of figuring out maintenance and figuring out the right numbers of like certain bridge loads and how you actually upkeep reinforced concrete, yada yada yada. And this is called the Mothman incident because notoriously, weeks or months before the bridge collapsed, people saw the Mothman on the bridge.
Wow.
So there's a statue of him in Point Pleasant. I'm pretty sure there's a movie made out of it, out of this fictional creature. But yeah. Another thing, highway revolts. Okay, so what the highway system did was it interconnected all of the major cities in America via high speed roads and bridges. A lot of these roads cut through cities, like major urban centers, and a lot of people did not like this. So one of the planned highways was meant to go through downtown Atlanta. Like you see in like this right here is Atlanta. They wanted to add like these
The
highways
lines
here
yeah.
that would have cut through a whole bunch of communities. So
Now you called this in your notes, in your slide, you said this was absurd. So why was the Atlanta freeway revolt absurd?
it's because if you actually look at like the number of people who would have been displaced from this, like from this highway, it would have been tens of thousands of people losing their homes.
Mm-hmm.
And like the community really did band together to get this thing canceled. I really
I didn't know I didn't know which thing you're saying is absurd. You're saying the plan was absurd or the revolt against it was absurd?
well, okay, so the plan was absurd, and this is like one of the largest. This is probably like the largest revolt against the highway system.
And I'm sorry, what year is this going on?
This was, I mean, I couldn't find much on it, but like this went on from like the 60s all the way until 1994, it says.
Oh, okay. This was an ongoing battle over whether this thing would be built, basically.
Yeah. Like it goes through like all of this high density housing through like some of the most prime real estate in Atlanta. So yeah, usually like the NIMBYs win. So that's not in my backyard. So
Right.
if you cut through prime real estate, you can expect more resistance from the locals.
Right. Yeah, and so part of what would happen, right, is that if people were well heeled and you were trying to take their house, then they were probably pretty effective in fighting back. But I think often there'd be a community that had been there a long time. It had sort of tradition on its side, but maybe they weren't rich, and they would just get wiped out by some of these projects, right?
Yeah, I have some like really shocking photos like later from
Okay.
like the sheer number of like the sheer quantity of communities that were just bulldozed. So yeah, these are the two trucks that the feds mandate that you design your bridge around.
Right.
Although I've noticed in my professional experience that the states, they have their own trucks that they want to go over the roads. So the states are stricter than the feds. Like I've noticed that Michigan has the heaviest trucks that they want to go over the roads.
Huh.
And they, God bless them, the people of Michigan really don't want any trucks to cause any trouble to their roads. So they have me do calculations for 16 different trucks, like unique trucks going over their bridges. It's a lot of work, but they don't want their bridges to collapse.
Sorry, Clossington, I'm distracted by something in the chat. Vehement says, but Mr. Dent, the plans have been available in the local planning office for the last 9 months.
Well, yeah.
Good call out there.
Yeah. So this brings me to where we are today. So concrete has a lifespan of 50 to 65 years, and all of our bridges and highways were built in the 60s. So,
let's not exaggerate. Only 40,000 miles out of 48,000 miles were built back then.
So
right? It's not that bad.
Well, so the roads are usually built for more like 30 years, realistically. So we're talking, but like roads are pretty easy to replace. Bridges are not. And so like every once in a, like ever since like the 1990s, you'll see like really big bipartisan pushes from the federal government to subsidize the replacement of aging infrastructure. Today, the U.S. spends about $450 billion on all public infrastructure. So that's federal, state, and local. And out of that, about $50 billion are spent on the highways each year. So, like, as I found out, they have dramatically increased the amount of spending for bridges over the last decade. Like my home state of Pennsylvania, like in 2012, my home state of Pennsylvania embarked on the Rapid Bridge Replacement Project. So this is the replacement of 558 structurally deficient bridges across the state in one decade. Through, I mean, it's called the public-private partnership, but I'll get onto this later. It's a financing scheme.
Mm-hmm.
Like debt go burr.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, when you talked about the increase that we're seeing an increase in infrastructure spending, and wasn't this a famous part of President Biden's?
Yeah, I have a breakdown of that later.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Biden, he proposed $2.1 trillion of infrastructure spending,
which would be double what they spent in the highway.
The actual creation of it. Yeah.
In the creation of it. Yeah. Wow.
They actually, surprisingly, a lot of it was cut, and it ended up being only like $500 billion. So it's not too bad. Here it is. So I was wrong. It was $2.6 trillion on infrastructure. However, it was cut down to $550 billion. $110 billion goes to roads and bridges.
Yeah, because what we're not covering, well, you'll get to it a little bit when you talk about the U.S. having a C- grade, but there are other infrastructure issues besides roads and bridges to discuss, right?
Yeah.
There's a very cool thing that he wants to share, and the paywall is stopping him. But please, could you paste it in the chat?
This, yeah, sure. Shoot. I'll just
Yeah, I'll try it to make sure the link works. Okay, go ahead.
All right, so they wanted to stuff it with pork. They wanted all sorts of weird energy, like sustainability scheme stuff. They wanted like $300 billion towards windmills and like they wanted to create this home and community based care economy. Like they framed it as creating like their own, like they wanted to create this weird NGO network from scratch with like $300 billion of public funding. Even though we're trying to repair the roads. Like, so out of all of the actual spending that was passed, we ended up getting $110 billion towards repairing and replacing the roads and bridges. Railways get a lot too. Railways are not in good condition.
I see. I'm understanding the visual you put up here. It's showing the plan, but then there's a bunch of things that have $0 under them. Those are the things that didn't make
cut. Yeah. Right.
And so that includes clean energy tax credits and home and community-based care, whatever the hell that is, that kind of stuff, right? Okay.
Yeah. They also, like, I remember during the Green New Deal push, they wanted to like redesign every home in America to be energy efficient or something like that.
Wow.
Well, this was part of it.
Okay. Got it.
It's like, hey, give me $200 billion to refurbish every house in America using federal spending that's meant to go to the roads.
Wow.
So thanks, guys. So America has a cumulative infrastructure grade of C-. So,
and that's as of last year, 2021.
As of last year. We are
Okay.
actually up from a D minus in 2017.
Oh, good.
So I actually this statistic comes from the American Society of Civil Engineers. It's a professional organization that I myself am a part of. These guys rate. These guys have tracked the like ever since the sort of retrenchment of the 70s and 80s. They've tracked how well America has done at upkeeping its infrastructure, and I'd say that we hit a low point in like the early 2000s, and then all of the planning that went into replacing the time bomb of concrete was eventually they actually replaced the bridges and roads, and so we're doing a little bit better now. We still have a C for bridges, and what do we have for roads? Yeah, we have a B. Wait, no, we have a D for roads.
Jeez.
This is mostly because of how dilapidated a lot of our major urban centers in the Midwest are.
Really, the Midwest in particular.
I'd say the Midwest in particular.
Huh.
Like out of all of the cities I've gone to visit, I'd say like Cleveland has god awful roads. Detroit has bad roads. Pittsburgh has very good roads.
I'm sorry, who has good roads?
I really like the roads in Pittsburgh.
This is for the whole nation, but I assume you can go like state by state and see what each state's ratings are and that kind of stuff.
I believe so.
We don't have to get into it. I was just curious.
We don't have to get into it, but they do actually break down like the cities.
Oh, the cities. Okay.
Like the major cities. Just as a tangent, I really hate cyclists professionally.
Why is that?
So just as a reoccurring thing, the cyclists always want to hijack roads for themselves. Like ever since the 1880s, we like every single time I go to like a town hall meeting and we're talking about like replacing a bridge or roads, they're like some urban planner says, hey, we need to add bicycle lanes that like one person will use in 2 years.
Right. Well, it's tricky because I know Horace Dediu writes about this, the bicycles use in Europe and stuff. There are places like Amsterdam where bicycle use is more integrated and it's culturally sort of part of how things are done and stuff like that. And so it makes more sense, right?
Yeah.
But the United States is on such a scale that I don't know if a bicycle culture is ever going to really transfer to the United States just because of scale.
Sir, this is not Amsterdam. This is Detroit.
Right. Exactly. I'm sorry, for Americans who haven't visited Europe, the big shocker for me is just how small everything is. Like the city of London with Parliament and everything you've ever heard of is 1 square mile. Okay. I mean, it is on such a smaller scale than we're used to in the United States. It's almost like going to a different dimension or something. I mean, it's really different. The ice cubes were smaller in Sicily. It was hilarious. Anyway.
Yeah. I can probably like. Do you have the New York Times?
I got blocked too.
Oh, you got blocked too.
Yep. And I'm on a. Anyway, what does it show? Just tell us what it has so people can.
Okay, so you have these nice. I think I have a slide on it a little bit later. So you have this nice. You had these nice grid communities, and then afterward, like before, like these nice black and white communities. Afterwards, you have these ugly highways jutting through them.
Mm-hmm. So it says it shows before and after.
Yeah, it shows before and after.
Okay, so it's going to show you something like 1955 or earlier, something like that, and compare it to 1965 or later, something along those lines, right?
Yeah, something like that. Well, that's exactly what it is. I'll post the link in chat.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we have a C minus in infrastructure. This does not. So they do compare the states. They do break it down into what kind of infrastructure, and
Right.
and I'd say that we're doing a little bit better. Our roads could do a whole lot better, but like I'd say the worst out of all of these, like it has a D plus, it should have a D minus or like failing. Like wastewater management is awful. Stormwater management is awful.
That's scary.
Levees are awful.
Now, when you talk about wastewater management and stormwater management, this is where they end up sending out the notice saying, don't drink your tap water, or what's it called? A boil alert or whatever.
Yeah. Something like
right?
that.
Yeah. It's kind of scary.
So
I would just like to note for the record that my family has not drank from the tap water. Well, the entire life of my children, we have a different way of getting water.
Yeah. But we can do a whole lot better. So the good, I'm going to be very hard on the highway later, but I just want to say, cities like Phoenix, Arizona, Austin, Texas, Denver, Colorado, Salt Lake City, and Las Vegas, these would not exist without the highways and the traffic that they pulled in.
Las Vegas was essentially not there prior to the highways, right?
Yes.
I mean, I've seen what it was before. There was just nothing there, basically.
Yeah, like the West really benefited from the highways probably more than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
It can be kind of debated whether or not like this would have happened naturally anyways.
Right.
But it happened a lot earlier because of the boom of 56 to 66. Mm-hmm. So agriculture, freight costs plummeted. You had the trucking boom of the 1970s.
Now, I'm not familiar with this. What is basically trucking was not such a major feature. It was more railroads prior to the highway system being completed, I guess.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Now, yep. Mm-hmm.
Right. So in the 70s, we really switch over to what we know now, which is there's just, if you're anywhere near a highway, there's just trucks all the time.
Yeah, pretty much. Like our interstates are kind of designed around trucks almost.
Right. Yeah.
Also my point about the West, like I did a deep dive into how much each state spends as part of their state, as part of their state budget. Most states spend around like 10 to 15% of their state budget on infrastructure. Wyoming spends about 25% on roads. Something similar is with Alaska. South Dakota is very heavy South Dakota, North Dakota, they spend a lot on the roads too. And I have this nice graph that shows like per capita how many roads were built. And Wyoming, Nevada, Montana, Utah and New Mexico, Arizona, like all these Western states, like would not have been connected to to the rest of the country had it not been for this big boom. So all of this wealth from the cities who end up getting demolished go into the hinterlands and out west. And also you have these extractive industries getting a lot more.
Wait, sorry, on that last point, before you get past it, it's reminding me a little bit, if you squint, of the U.S. Postal Service, right? Where I suspect that the cost, the price of sending a piece of mail from one part of a small city to another part is inflated relative to, the price of sending it off to some cabin in the middle of nowhere which gets subsidized, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, it just seems like we have this in a couple areas in American life where we support, we subsidize remote life in a way that is maybe economically not totally efficient,
Yeah. Wealth has flown from the cities to the hinterlands on the Fed's dime. U.S. extractive industries get more competitive. So trucking is a lot more versatile than the railroads, like for very obvious reasons. Like railroads work when you're like shipping large quantities of heavy stuff in bulk. But if you have if you want to I guess be a little bit more like if you wanted to haul like loads that are not 10 tons, you want to use trucks. And also, the fact is that in 1919 it took 62 days to go from DC to San Francisco. It takes 42 hours on the highway now. Like my dad actually did a cross country trip from the East Coast all the way to LA. It took him, well, it would have taken him about 3 days, but
wow.
But he took a nice day off of driving to enjoy Las Vegas. So, it's there's just the undeniable fact of, hey, we cut it back by X amount of travel time.
Right.
I think in 1956 it only took like 10 days to travel from DC to San Francisco, but this is like, but it would have you like snake through city centers, and it's very inconvenient. So the interstate highway system is a little bit more convenient.
Well, I guess we could put it this way, right? If we're using 62 days as the benchmark, which you got that from the 1919 Eisenhower thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We could say that it's like a tenth of the time.
Yeah.
Right. Because doing it in 3 days like your dad did or whatever that's really going and being insane about it. More realistically, if you're going to drive from one coast to the other, you're going to take 5 or 6 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's also increased suburbanization of America. I mean, this was
there's a lot of commentary on this, and one of the things that's interesting, as I'm sure you know, is that it's from left and right.
I mean, it was already sort of happening, like before the highway boom. It was already happening post World War II, but it accelerated. It really accelerated after the highways were created.
Right.
So the bad. So I went on a tirade on Telegram, the 3 takes of like why highways are bad. So there's like the poetic aesthetic anti-highway propaganda. We have become atomized. What does it mean to view a landscape if it just passes you by? I went and looked for actual I went looking for these sorts of critiques, and G.K. Chesterton was talking about trains, being bad for the soul, like at the turn of the century.
Right.
And you had like Russell Kirk, who didn't believe in this sort of old school conservative, saying, don't use cars. I just use my bike to go everywhere that I need to go, and I'm perfectly content.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah. I mean, I guess you have like a certain, unless you are very, very grounded in your hometown. Like the simple fact is like you can't really there is no economy to only riding around on bicycles. Like you have to have like an academic job like Chesterton or Kirk or Tolkien to conveniently say, we shouldn't use highways or railroads. Like farmers
there's that issue I brought up of scale, right?
Yeah.
If you're a Don at Oxford, you're functioning on a very different scale than any American that isn't in like Manhattan or a couple other places in the United States. The rest of us are operating on a much larger scale, and we typically need to be able to get around.
Yeah, like pragmatically, like, you know, we live in a globalized economy, like probably rural farmers more than anyone else, who, like, these farmers need, like, they're incredibly sensitive to like grain prices, like internationally, and they need to be able to hold on to their yield and then just export as soon as possible whenever they see an opportunity. And you need top infrastructure to actually facilitate the viability of American agriculture. So saying, you know, it's bad for the soul doesn't really, it's not really helping anyone. Like, I'm just trying to feed my family. Yeah, so I don't really see the poetic anti-train propaganda as being too poignant. So malinvestment. Okay, so we spent $1 trillion on the highway system. There wasn't like like a giant bubble the same way there was with the railways. Because the highways aren't entirely public, or at least mostly. Like, sometimes you have like large companies like essentially take out these maintenance contracts with the government in exchange for being able to in order to toll people on their roads.
Right.
Yeah.
Real quick on the railroads, short story here on the 19th century railroads is that there's a lot of speculation, a lot of shady stuff went on. Most of the railroad companies went bankrupt. There were exceptions, like James J. Hill is considered a sort of heroic figure, by libertarian types like me, I guess. He was someone who did not get in on the subsidies. He built it in a more privately oriented, market oriented way, and he did very well with his railroads. And so there was a way to do it without government funding, and James J. Hill showed that. But there was a lot of nonsense that went on and a lot of corruption and so forth. But yeah, what you're saying is we didn't really get to see that kind of comparison with the build out of the highways because the federal government just did it all. So there wasn't a control group, right?
Yeah, like a much better example would be comparing them to like the military industrial complex. Like, instead of like people know like Raytheon and Northrop Grumman, but no one knows like AECOM or Jacobs. There are these engineering mega firms that take out these giant projects for the federal government or for state governments. Like, oftentimes, like, counties don't have they don't have the money to pay engineers to be professional engineers for the county. So instead, they take up contracts for these. They take out contracts to these. They give contracts to these mega firms who have responsibility for running maintenance for 10, 20 years, whatever it is. Hey, company X, run our engineering department for 10 years for X number of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there is a sort of revolving door, the same way there is like a revolving door for military contracts. Like, nobody with actual skill or ambition works for like the local DOT or like for the highway administration. Like, anyone who is anyone becomes like a private contractor. And there is a sort of revolving door, but I don't think it's nearly as corrupt. It's nowhere near as corrupt as the private military contractors, from what I've seen.
Yeah,
and from the research I've done.
I can suggest one reason why, which is that all of us have to actually drive on these roads and bridges and so forth. So
Yeah.
if they were goofing off the way they do in the military industrial complex, we would notice real fast.
Yeah. These guys are professional autists. They love what they do. They build the roads. They write the design manuals, and they know what they're talking about. And people complain to them at their local town hall meetings. So there's a lot more of a feedback mechanism, fortunately or unfortunately.
Right.
So probably the worst, pragmatically, like the highways destroyed a lot of cities. Like a lot of cities. So this right here is rock.
Now, what do you mean by that? Now, Detroit is the classic case of a city that's just like failed, right? And that's not precisely what you mean, right? You're talking about communities within cities, or are you saying that like a city was there, they cut a highway through it, and then the city died?
Yes, this is the second one.
Really?
Yeah. So this is Rochester, New York.
Okay.
So I think I had I don't have a picture of it. So Rochester, New York. So essentially, what they did was they built this ring of highways around their most valued real estate. So what they did was they bulldozed, I think, like 800 homes. They made acres upon acres of prime real estate unlivable. Nobody wants to live next to a highway, especially like no one wants to like live in a high rise right next to a highway with all of that noise. And like all of these communities are cut off from each other. Many of them were bulldozed, and the city of Rochester, I think, from the looks of it, they want to demolish this loop and actually reconnect their communities.
Wow. So you're saying that what had been inside had been like the thriving center of Rochester, and
yes.
After they built that loop, what was inside the loop started to die.
Yes.
People just didn't want to be there, basically.
Yeah, people don't want to live right next to a highway. It's like
right.
Big whoop.
Right. I'm reminded of the Blues Brothers scene where Jake goes back to Elwood's apartment, and literally there's like a train or the owl or whatever going right past the window. So very frequently they're just like they can't even talk to each other. It's so loud.
Yeah. And like the thing is, like when designing these highways, like these Futurama highways, the engineers took a look and they were like, all right, what is the cheapest land that we could bulldoze or like run a highway through? And, I say like in my slot, I said like on Telegram, we're like reading the 1950s autistic engineers, they looked at city maps and said, hey, this land is the cheapest for us to grab via eminent domain, and it makes just the straightest line. Let's build a highway through it. They didn't mean to destroy urban Black America, but they did a very good job at it.
Right.
So, that's a lot of like Vice News lefties complain about this.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it was made out of malice. I think they just looked at the cheapest land and said, in the case of a nuclear apocalypse, we need to get people out. Let's make an exit.
So you're saying you're not going to accept a sort of the road engineers were all racists explanation necessarily, but the practical effect, the objective effect, was that it really messed up the urban Black communities.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah.
They also demolished a lot of Catholic ghettos as well.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But yeah, so a lot of ghettos were demolished because of it.
What's this phrase? Urban renewal. Wasn't this in vogue about that time?
Um, I get. Hello. Oh, there
Go
it
ahead.
is. Um, I wouldn't know about urban renewal. Like
Okay.
part, well, yeah, part of it is tearing down these god awful highways that go through prime real estate. Um, Part of it is if you have a highway connecting the suburbs to the cities, you make all of your transportation about owning a car. Uh, Essentially, public transport died. Um, like in San Francisco, if you've ever gone there, there's this nice, like, expensive area around the coast, but then there are just miles upon miles of just like low development suburbs,
Right.
and it's just it's absolutely poisonous. Uh,
Yeah. Oh, and I'm sorry for those who maybe aren't familiar with this sort of, the whole debate around mixed use communities and all that kind of stuff. Explain why you call miles and miles of just suburban housing poisonous. What bothers you about that? I mean, I kind of agree, but I think it'd be helpful for the audience
um,
to explain real quick.
okay, so I actually laid out the problem of
Okay.
car-centric planning and the rise of the 5/1.
Mhm.
Okay, so you have so it's sort of hard to explain. So essentially, um, there's very little. Okay, so imagine you have like a city with like a nice like nestled historic zone and a main street, and outside of that main street, you have like acres upon acres of uh, of detached single family home suburbia. Um,
Right.
the thing is, like, what is the middle ground between suburbia and these urban high rises that are more or less no longer profitable anymore? So the answer is the 5/1 or the 5/1, which are these. They're called 5/1s because what you have is like one level of like one floor of concrete, like concrete foundation basically, and then four levels of cheap flame retardant wood like stories. Um, so you end up with all these corporate overlords that millennials pay through the nose to to rent a room from. Um, like these 5/1s exist huddled between like main streets and suburbia,
Mhm.
and you have very few townhouses actually developed. Like you have very few quaint townhouses, like like any sort of communal living that is not living in a high rise has been devolved to these mid rises, and
Okay.
it's not it's it's actually very expensive. In part, I think this is part of a trend that I think happened in response to the 2008 2009 financial crisis. Um,
Oh,
so
so I'm sorry. This 5/1 trend. You're saying that this is actually relatively recent, like last 10 years
yes,
kind of phenomenon.
like
Okay.
like from the few towns that I've lived in like over the last like few years, I've seen these 5/1s spring up all over the place. Um, and I believe it's because of the financial crisis. So what happened was there was a boom in single family housing, right? Suburbia expanded too quickly. It was inflated by um, it was inflated by the federal government trying to increase home ownership beyond the capacity to actually buy, like to actually pay off their loans.
We've covered the government's involvement in the mortgage market heavily on this channel. Go ahead.
So after the financial crisis, what happens to the housing market? So what happens is that you do not end up with as many single family homes being built as usual. Usually every decade, about 20 million new single family homes are built. About this, it's about 20 million. However, between 2010 and 2020, only about 10 million new single family homes are created. So the suburbs, they're not making suburbs anymore.
Wow.
And also, like from some of my work with state planners, my discussions with state planners have led me to believe that they want to throttle the development of the suburbs, and they've actually tried to stop the rezoning of agricultural areas. Like farmers want to sell their land and turn it into a suburb.
Right.
The state planners do not want this to happen because they fear another 2008 financial crisis again. They fear that housing will get out of control. So they have artificially throttled the development of suburbia, which is why millennials can't buy houses.
So you're saying this is not something that's happening as as far as you know, it's not driven at a federal level, but the pattern is repeating enough that, like you said, the housing stock increased by half as much as usual. And this is because of local planners mostly.
So local planners, they mostly copy and paste their building codes from this sort of like Bible of like universal building codes. You live in a town of like a couple thousand people. You don't have professional architects, so you copy and paste it from this universal sort of book of standards, and so you end up with 5/1s, these sort of pods in which millennials are overcharged for rent for while they can't buy new homes.
Right.
So yeah, that's my like theory. Like, and it's not good. Like I've seen these things being built all over the place. Like there are actually two being built like right down the street from me. Like my university town, you had your Main Street, but outside of Main Street, you had these 5/1s, and then you had the suburbs. Like these 5/1s, like as a creation of these perverse zoning laws, and due to the development of suburbia or the overgrowth of suburbia, we end up with millennials and Zoomers like myself in the pod.
Right. Got it.
Yeah. So that's one of the problems that we've come across. The end of public transportation. Millennials can't own houses because the project of suburbia died in 2008, and now we have a road funding problem coming down the line. So
right. So heavy push for electric vehicles, which has become like a meme recently of, let them eat cake, basically, right? let them drive electric cars.
So as part of the Build Back Better program, the main goal I've seen floated in universities is 50% of U.S. cars will be electrical vehicles by 2030.
Wait. 50% of new cars?
No, of all U.S. cars will
what?
Be. Okay,
how is that even possible?
So these guys
they'd have to do like the gun buyback programs. They'd have to buy your gas. We'll buy your gas fueled car from you and issue you an electric car. I mean, that would be a tremendous turnover. Because I assume right now the percentage of electric vehicles is like what 0.1% or something. I mean,
it's like
negligible, right?
It's like one. It's like two, I want to say 2%.
Oh, okay. That's higher than I would have guessed. Okay.
It's like 1-2%.
Yeah.
But the thing is,
2030 is 8 years from now. I mean, this is insane.
It is insane. Like I think the UK has 50% by 2040
Mm.
or something like that, but I wouldn't. I'm not 100% sure. So the problem is that states fund their highways through gas tax. Um, I did I actually include? Oh yeah, I did include it. Towards the beginning, I included how um, how oh yeah, here it is.
There it is.
So the interstate highway system is funded uh, through the Highway Trust Fund, which is mostly funded by a 18.3 cent per gallon tax on gasoline. Um, and most states, they collect about they have a tax of 6 cents per gallon of gasoline.
On top of that, right? So
On top of that,
you combine those for your total taxes on your gallon of gas. Yeah.
yes. So you have this. Most states, I'd say about like 70% of their funding for roads comes from gas tax. In theory, it works because you drive a car on the roads, you buy gas, the gas pays for the roads.
It's sort of like a toll, paying a toll for driving on the roads, kind of
Yeah.
sort of an indirect and not as good probably, but
Yeah,
anyway.
exactly. But the problem is electric cars don't need gas. So the big question is, how do you pay for roads?
If they achieve their goal of having a significant, and we would hit this problem even once you hit like 25% or 10 to 25% of cars being electric vehicles, they're going to see a huge shortfall, right?
Yeah. Like the electrical vehicle question is a question in and of itself. But I'm just addressing the on the face of it. How do you fund the roads if they are cracking because of the time bomb, and because we are getting rid of the source of funding, the source of state funding for the roads?
Right.
So solution one, print municipal bonds. So these are sort of junk bonds that don't really accrue much wealth. And so municipal bond printer go burr, public spending go burr. So that's a bad idea. And then the second idea I've seen float around universities is tax cars based on the miles they have traveled. So how do you do this? Like how will this be accounted for? It's absurd. But they've been like I've seen at university that there's some models being floated around for how to do this. Before the gas tax, you had property taxes fund gas, but
or fund the roads.
Or I'm sorry, fund the roads.
Yeah.
But you don't really see this anymore. Now it's just gas and municipal bond printer go burr. But I'm not sure how this will develop.
Right.
Yeah. So the Fed.
So I'm confused by your final comment here about electric vehicle infrastructure. I guess I don't really understand. I mean, you just need a place to plug in, right? Is that hard?
Okay, so if you plug it in, it takes a half an hour to actually refill your battery or to like fill up your tank with juice. However, like you only really have like 200 mile. Well, you can only really drive 200 miles, and then you need to then you need to stop for a half an hour to pump up your gas,
right?
Or to recharge your battery. There is no infrastructure for it right now, or there's very little infrastructure for it right now. It's if you want to get like a Tesla and go completely electric, you'd better live in an urban area because there's nothing out in the sticks for you.
Right.
There
won't be a place for you to plug in, basically.
And Biden tried to earmark about $5 billion towards the development of EV infrastructure across the US. But that got shot down because, once again, we are funding roads. We're not funding we're not funding projects like that.
Right.
So that's something to be concerned about in the future. How do we pay for the roads?
Right.
So I guess this is sort of just my ethos of what the enemy is when it comes to the highways.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily that we have highways interconnecting our cities. The enemies are certain economies of scale crushing the little guy. So I'm afraid of corporate landowners. The stifling of suburbia and the inability of millennials and Zoomers like myself to own real estate. I'm scared of that because the suburbanization caused by the highways, the American dream ended up being a little bit more expensive and cost prohibitive for millennials than initially anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
Consumer preferences for consistency. So as soon as you get off a highway, there are about 10 different brands that you will see. You'll always see a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts. You'll always see like these strip mall sort of places, fast food chains. You see like these hotel franchises that are like 5 different hotel franchises that have the exact same format.
All run by a guy from India with the last name of Patel.
Yeah.
It turns out.
Like they were onto this. They were actually on to the 5/1 building style before anyone else. So I'm concerned about the Holiday Inn's takeover of the hospitality industry. I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, I was going to say on the homogenization of what you run into when you get off the road. This is something my dad was really into, and he kind of got me into it too, which is that when you're driving around the country, you want to get a chance to, some local color or whatever. If nothing else, hit a diner that isn't like a chain, right? So where the grandma down the street makes the pies, and that kind of the charming small town thing. I do find them now and again, but it's gotten harder. I mean, over the course of my life, I have seen the change. The homogenization where everywhere it's like, oh well, I guess we'll go to this chain because it's okay, and I don't see anything else anywhere near.
Yeah, like when it comes to whether it's restaurants or hotels, all you really have are either you have middle of the road consistent food that will never wow you, or you could take a risk with some shoddy diner in the middle of nowhere, or you could actually eat out and eat nice.
Right.
So my concern is the dominance of the lower middle, and the sort of strip mall society that highway pullovers have created.
I'm sorry. This is a new phrase to me. You used this when we were talking earlier. Pullovers. So that just means a place that its basic raison d'etre is that people pull off the highway and get gas and eat and then get back on the highway, and there's not much more going on there. And that's what you call a highway pullover?
It's not the technical term, but it's good enough for now.
Okay.
The whole point of the highway is that there are no stops. You can just go straight and fast.
Right.
And the result of this is that you have consumer preferences for consistency and for certain reliable brands over, pullover in the middle of nowhere, and you don't know what you're going to get. But I think this is just everybody can drive anywhere at any time.
Right.
Certain preferences will win out over others.
And just for the non-Americans listening, and we do, Like, I mean, I don't think I'm unusual. I mean, I have put a lot of miles on my cars over the years, just driving all over the place. We really do drive around on these highways.
Yeah. So there's the urban blight issue, but there's also, you know, does a what do the highways actually look like? Or like what do the pullover like the what do they actually look like? Um, I'm trying to find. I'm actually kind of bothered that I can't find the Rochester inner because I don't think I quite like hit it over the head enough. Like exactly like how many communities were absolutely demolished by the highways.
Right.
Um,
Oh, do you have a lot of slides left?
no, this is it.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Um,
Well, here, how about you look for that, and I'll pull up Super Chat. So
Okay.
I know we've got at least one to respond to.
right, sounds good.
So, Lady of Shalott says roads were key to the European Union's domination of Ireland. My grandparents used to joke about Ireland having no roads. The EU staked their claim with highways. So that's interesting. So basically, the EU was the interstate highway project for Ireland, or they were the ones who came in and said, "Okay, you guys need some roads."
I mean, isn't the whole point of like North like one of the big sticking points of Ireland or the UK sticking in the EU, like the fact that there is a very porous border with Northern Ireland and Ireland. No, is that what she's talking about?
Well, let's see. It would be the Republic of Ireland, not Northern Ireland, but the Republic of Ireland that would have that relationship with the EU, I would expect. Right. And so that's probably what she's talking about, that the EU really moved in with the highways and now has, I assume, a lot of influence in Ireland. Anyway, one more from Sam153. He says, a tip for autistic civil engineering roads talk. So thank you, Sam. Okay, so did you find one more thing to
like there are a few like really atrocious examples. I'll just pull this one up. I know it's Reddit, but you know it's a good image.
Okay.
Come on. Yeah, this is like before. Well, come on. Shoot.
It lets you slide back and forth and show the difference.
Oh, here it is. Won't let me interact. It won't let me interact with it. Shoot.
Now, I do remember seeing in my own city of St. Louis, seeing an overhead shot from, I feel like it was the mid 50s, and then another one like 10 years later. And it looked like a war had gone on in the city of St. Louis. Now, I think part of that was the effect of highways that we've been discussing. Part of it in the case of St. Louis was that St. Louis had infamously some of the early public housing projects, which were a complete disaster, and they had to demolish them. And so, you know, one picture you see these buildings and communities, and the next picture you just see like a bunch of empty space where they've knocked down public housing and stuff like that, you know.
Well, like I said, you know, these engineers like straight lines and cheap lines, and there's a nice straight cheap line going through the ghetto, and if you evict these people, then place an ugly highway over them, and destroy public transportation. Can you really be surprised that there's a whole lot of, there's a whole lot of poverty and then a need for housing. Well, a grassroots demand for housing projects.
Hey, more chats coming in from Cringe Walker. He says, okay, wait a second. Oh, I see. There's more than one from him. Okay, sorry. First one from Cringe Walker. From an architect to an engineer, thanks for this, Klossman. Top tier presentation. Hope to hear more. Excellent. Thank you, sir. And another one from Cringe Walker. Don't forget that time a southern town petitioned the USSR to repair their highways because the US hadn't. Roads were repaired within a month. That's a great story. Okay, and then one more from WWII, I guess. Highways save so much time when visiting the family diaspora, especially for rural farming extended families. Cities would take hours to traverse. Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm in a semi-rural area now, since we had to move because of having so many children, and it is amazing how much more time I spend driving. And this is nothing like really being out in a small town where just to go shopping you drive 30 minutes just to get some groceries or whatever, right? Or more, and that's with good roads.
Yeah, I mean, everybody likes good roads, like in theory. I don't think there's too much to complain about from rural areas about like highways. I mean, you could talk about like the breakdown of sort of civil society. Anyone can move anywhere or drive anywhere, go anywhere. What does this do to the mindset of someone who just wants to live in their hometown, or right, someone that actually wants to get a job somewhere else? We have the benefit of jobs are now more plentiful in rural areas and like areas outside of the far east or far west coast. However, you're a lot more atomized. So you have a little bit more wealth, but you're a little bit more on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost no one actually participates in their like state or municipal like government at all.
Right. Yeah, like the old New England town hall meeting. That's pretty much dead.
Yeah.
Great. Hey, I wanted to mention something real quick. Someone I co-authored with, which doesn't mean much because everybody co-authors with them. But anyway, there's a libertarian economist named Walter Block, and he wrote a massive tome called Privatization of Roads and Highways, Human and Economic Factors. So if you want to see the full Mo Roads taken on in a really scholarly way, I am going to share the link, which I just had and now I don't. Okay, where is it?
I found it on Mises.org.
Yeah, I'm going to put it in the, I'm just sharing the Amazon link. Oh, I see. Ha, wrong keyboard. Keyboard's talking the wrong device. Okay, I got it now. Oh, yeah, you're showing it. Yep. Yeah, I'm sharing the Amazon link, but you can go to LVMI. And yeah, you're right. I should share that one too. But what are you saying?
Like the justification for the highways was 36,000 people die every year because of deadly highways. Walter Block says this book is dedicated to my fellow Americans. Some 40,000 of them per year have died needlessly in traffic fatalities. That is grim. That is very grim.
Yeah. Okay, here's the Mises link. Anyway, just had to mention that. I have not read the book. I don't remember if I have that one, actually, but I have not read it. But I can tell you that Walter Block is autistic in his own way. And I think certainly if you're interested in these things, you would find some interesting information out and interesting arguments in his book. Okay, well, let's move towards wrapping it up. Got time to pick up my karate kids from karate.
No,
What? Did you?
that's nice. That's nice.
Oh, okay. um, yeah, well, thank you, sir. Really good. And I love it that not only did you cover the history really well, but you've got the on the ground experience of working with folks. And I found it particularly interesting. I mean, you're not that old, so your career has really been the post 2008 era, right? Which you were describing as heading towards these 5/1s, and that the landscape has really shifted in the last 12 years or so from what it was before, right?
I mean, I've only been an engineer for 2 years, but
Okay.
the writing's on the wall.
Yeah.
And also, I sort of float between different circles, and I hear things about certain throttlings of certain important sectors of the economy, and I take notice.
Right. So I'm sorry, when you say the writing's on the wall, you mean certain trends that you've talked about today
Yeah.
are pretty clear. Unless something dramatic happens, you kind of see where we're headed on some of these things, right?
I think you guys are going to end up with an electric car in the next 20 years, whether you like it or not.
Wow.
I look at the arguments people made against the creation of the highways, or like the adoption of cars in general. And there's no infrastructure for cars in the middle of the West. Like there's no infrastructure for cars in the South. Um, um, a lot of people are stuck in their ways and will just make like arguments to the status quo by default. So I think eventually the trucks will be shunted into getting a Tesla. That writing is on the wall.
Trucks will be using electric engines?
Well, actually, some are. Like a lot of urban centers are trying to transition from having their buses be from diesel to electric.
Right.
Just as a way of like strong arming the public.
Which is funny because trolleys are actually an old technology.
Yeah.
That'd be back to the future,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was a pleasure to be invited on. I actually really enjoy talking about. I mean, this is what I do professionally.
Yeah. Right. Well, that I was excited because, of course, you and I both talk about political theory and things like this. But I was excited to have you talk in your own, from your own expertise as in your professional area. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I think we're caught up with everything in terms of chats and all that stuff. Let me check one more time on one place to make sure I didn't miss anything, because they tend to come in at the end sometimes, like the last several did. Okay, I think we are good. Yeah, read that one from, yeah, okay. I think we're all caught up. Okay, cool. Thank you, Clossington, and thanks, everybody. I will talk to you next week. I've got a lot of exciting stuff coming up. Very exciting scholar I got in touch with who I admire quite a bit, who I will be having on soon, I hope. And I think you guys will, I don't know what you'll think, but I like him a lot, and he's brilliant. So trying to figure out what topic I'll do with him. Wanted to mention again right at the end that we have a Mrs. Rad Lib stream. We're trying to do those once a month now. And on Saturday, we're going to talk about dating versus courtship, mostly about courtship. We're not going to spend a bunch of time talking about why dating's bad, really. It's more about what to do instead. It's been much requested, and there's been a great discussion going on in Lambda's Discord. My wife has a channel there now where people can talk to her about the topics we discuss on the Mrs. Rad Lib stream. So get in there now, and you can shape what we talk about on Saturday. We have some things to go over, and then we're going to try to hit a lot of the questions that people have been peppering my wife with in particular. So it should be really good. We're going to see if we can do it in less than 5 hours. There's a lot of stuff to go over, a lot of questions, a lot of people very passionate in this subject, on that subject. So looking forward to that on Saturday early by US hours. And that's it. Okay. Thank you, Clossington, and